So let's be honest, if you have a child who can't sit still, seems to be just like has endless amounts of energy, zones out mid-sentence, you probably are wondering, is this ADHD? Maybe that's what I'm seeing. Maybe you've heard it from their teacher. Maybe you Googled it. Maybe you've even tried things like medication or diets or supplements, and you still feel like something is missing. So, what happens with ADHD is there could be a lot of different reasons for those presenting behaviors that you're seeing. The causes might actually be very different from child to child based on what's happening on their inside. So, in this episode, we're going to go beyond the label of ADHD, looking at the whole child. We're going to talk about how mouth breathing and poor sleep can mimic ADHD symptoms, what research says about food dyes and ultra processed foods in their contribution to ADHD symptoms, why movement and structure can be medicine for your brain, and how modern classrooms might be setting kids up to struggle, which supplements and therapies might help, and which ones could be just hype, and even medication. Yes, we're going to talk about medication, what it does, how it impacts the gut, and how to support your child's body if you choose to use it. Because ADHD isn't always a problem that you need to fix, believe it or not. Sometimes it's just a message, a signal that the brain, body, and the environment is out of sync in some way. And when we start to understand what the body is trying to say, that's when real progress and some calm can begin. So if there is actually one thing I wish every parent knew about behavior and focus, is that how your child breathes, especially at night for long stretches of time, matters just as much as what they eat during the day. Most parents have never even thought about their child's airway until I bring it up in an oral motor assessment. But mouth breathing, snoring, restless sleep can look exactly like ADHD during the day. And here's why. When kids breathe through their mouth, especially at night, they're not getting the same oxygen exchange that you get when you breathe through your nose or nasal breathe. The nose filters, humidifies, and warms the air, but it also helps regulate nitric oxide and carbon dioxide, which control how oxygen moves through your bloodstream. When a child breathes through the mouth, oxygen delivery to the brain actually drops. Even a small reduction by a few percentage points can cause fragmented sleep, irritability, poor focus, and hyperactive behavior the next day. It's not that they're not trying hard enough to pay attention. Their brain is literally running on low fuel. So I often ask parents some of these simple questions during our intake. Do they snore? Do they grind their teeth? Do they wake up a lot? Are they restless? Do they breathe through their mouth? If you said yes to any of those, it's definitely worth looking deeper. Because sometimes mouth breathing can start as chronic congestion or allergies. Other times it could be due to the actual structure of their mouth. Things like low tongue posture, tight frenulums, or small nasal passages can make nose breathing very difficult. And when that happens, the jaw and the tongue compensate by opening the mouth, changing the muscle tone, and even over time, facial growth. That's why airway screening is such an important part of my oral motor evaluations. We don't just look at how the child chews and swallows, but whether their muscles and airway are even set up to breathe well while doing that. Because if your child's brain spends all night micro waking from low oxygen, or their body never hits a true deep REM sleep, they'll wake up in fight or flight before the day even starts. And we know what that looks like. Impulsivity, distractibility, emotional outbursts, mood swings, difficulty sitting still. It's not defiance. It's actually just dysregulation. And this can happen to adults as well, right? I actually had a client who was a man in his 30s, and he had like a very forward jaw. And it was actually, at that point, it was really difficult. So we had him consult with a special orthodontist and dentists. And basically at that point in his life, your bones are very set. he would have needed some pretty serious jaw surgery to correct that. But the reason his jaw came forward so much, right? That bottom jaw was actually jutting forward was because his airway was so narrow. So his body was literally making room for him to breathe, right? So that's why this is so important to address as early as possible. So, what can you do? Start just observing, right? Watch your child while they're sleeping. Is their mouth open? Are they snoring or grinding their teeth? If you notice these signs, consult with an ENT as well as a myofunctional therapist who specializes in retraining nasal breathing and strengthening of the tongue and the facial muscles that support proper airflow. Because everything really needs to be in balance and working properly so that you can breathe properly. And sometimes these small things really add up. So, releasing a tongue tie, treating allergies, widening a narrow palate can really transform not just sleep, but their daytime behavior. And the thing about breathing is that this will spill into feeding because if the body is constantly trying to take in air and has trouble, right? If you can't nasal breathe well, you're not going to be able to eat well, okay? Unless you're compensating in lots of different ways. But basically, your mouth is sort of busy doing other things when there's food in there. So you can't be using your mouth as the primary place to be breathing and expect eating to go well. I actually had another client she was also an adult, and she could not keep her mouth closed and nasal breathe for more than like 20 seconds at a time. Her mouth had to be open. And that's a real issue because, that means that there's might be something anatomically, very small or limiting in the back of your mouth. It could be enlarged adenoids or tonsils, but something is making that airway small so that you're not able to breathe through your nose. And we have to be able to breathe through our nose to eat really well. Okay. So our kids that are juggling these things, the body is always going to prioritize breathing over eating, right? So that's why it's really important that we look at airway when we're assessing your child's oral motor skills. And also, once they start sleeping deeply and breathing properly, a lot of things change. Their brain is getting all the oxygen it needs. Their body recovers. The behaviors that looked like ADHD start to quiet down, not because of the right medication, but because their nervous system is finally getting what it needs, right? And think of the body like a machine. It's really working to keep you alive. Gasping for air, you're not going to have spare bandwidth to do things like focus. Um, you know, every night, those that struggle to breathe, their brain and body are constantly compensating. And the result looks a lot like attention, hyperactivity, and irritability. Now, let's go into diet and artificial colors and that gut brain connection. Okay. So, what goes in the gut shows up in the brain. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit. You probably have heard, especially today's day and age, and the kids get candy, or you've probably heard on the news that some companies are taking artificial colors out of their food. And, it's because, there is research into it, and not to mention all the anecdotal evidence of parents that say that my kids get crazy after they eat this candy or this color or whatever. But the research is pretty clear. Artificial colors and preservatives don't necessarily cause ADHD, but they can amplify symptoms in sensitive kids for sure. So, for some children, dyes and ultra processed foods act like little igniters. So, an already overstimulated nervous system, and it's just the little spark that might tip the edge, right? So, when we eat them, your liver and your gut have to process those chemicals, and that adds stress to the body and increases inflammation, right? So, at the same time, they're not containing anything that contains nutrients, right? So now we've got a brain that's overexcited, undernourished, and inflamed. And that's a perfect storm for attention and regulation difficulties. So taking out the dyes and switching to organic snacks alone probably won't erase every ADHD symptom, but is it still worth doing? I would say absolutely. Think of dyes and preservatives as like a volume knob, right? Not a light switch. Might not be the cause, but they can definitely turn up the noise on behaviors that are already there. So when you turn that knob back down by replacing it with more organic options and natural choices, the brain can function with a little bit more clarity and calm. Okay. And it's not going to be like perfect. You probably are going to have days when that does creep in. But if it's something that you're consciously making an effort to swap out, you should see some overall gains. We're not just taking out the bad things, we're also making room for hopefully the good that is in the body to do its job well. Okay. Because when the gut is nourished and calm, the brain is getting the right signals. And that's when kids can start to do things like focus, regulate, and connect more easily. Um, so, speaking of fuel, let's talk about something else that gets often overlooked is how movement structure and environment shape focus. Because what we expect from kids today, sitting 6 to 8 hours, focusing through noise, lights, and now screens have been added to it. It doesn't exactly line up how our brains were designed to learn. Right. So we want to make sure that they are regulated before we expect them to do something. So let's talk about something that no supplement, therapy, or diet can replace, which is movement. I say it all the time. If a child's body is not regulated, their brain cannot focus. It's not a discipline issue, it's biology. So our brains are wired to move. Movement increases blood flow to the brain. It balances your neurotransmitters and it helps process sensory input. When kids move, their bodies release dopamine and serotonin, the same feel good chemicals that ADHD medications often target, right? So when we expect children to sit still for 6 hours in a bright, noisy classroom with maybe a 20-minute recess, we're setting them up to struggle. It's not that necessarily they can't pay attention, but their nervous system's being overloaded. And then on top of that, they're just underregulated because they haven't been moving enough. And it's not even just the school day. That's the issue. It's our modern world. Because you might be thinking, well, I sat through school, no problem. Right. But think about this. How much time are you spending playing, running, jumping when you weren't in school? Kids today have more screen time, less outdoor time, tighter schedules, and less unstructured play, which means that there's fewer opportunities to discharge all of that energy and reset their sensory systems. So if they're having trouble sitting through meals or transitions, it might not just be bad behavior, it might be their body communicating, saying that they need more sensory input and movement before they can focus. So, what can you do? Let's start small. Build in some more movement breaks during the day. Even an extra 5 minutes of jumping, stretching, and running fast outside can reset attention, even just for the next hour. Ask teachers if your child can help pass things out so that they're getting up and moving more. Encourage more outdoor play like climbing and swinging because nature offers sensory input that screens just can't replicate. And keeping routines consistent. Kids thrive on predictability. And when they know what's coming next, their nervous system does relax a little bit. So, we can't expect them to focus, be compliant, or whatever until their body is safe and regulated. It's true for adults too. We spend way too much time in front of screens. Hopefully, you're watching this while taking a walk or running as you speak. I'm joking, of course, but you might be. Who knows? But when we start meeting kids where they are physiologically, giving their body what it needs before we ask them for, to do something or to perform, everything is going to start to click. And this is especially true for boys. Boys definitely need more movement than girls do. And the best part, movement does not just improve focus, it builds confidence, body awareness, and self regulation. It's a simple, simple way to support kids with ADHD. Okay, so now let's talk about some support options like supplements, therapies, and even medication. Okay, so supplements, therapies, and medication, we can support the brain from both sides, inside and outside. So when we talk about ADHD, a lot of people talk about medication. Do you medicate? Do you not medicate? It's like one or the other. But the truth is there's like a lot of different options that you can do in between. And when we combine our strategies and supports, we can really get great results. So let's start with the natural options first, like supplements and nutrition and movement, right? So for many kids, I would say the first step would not be medication. It would be rebuilding what your brain is missing. So things like omega-3 fatty acids, right? They help the brain communicate better, lower inflammation, and support focus and regulation. Are they eating things that contain omega-3s like salmon and chia seeds? Maybe not. Okay. Also, magnesium and zinc can support mood, attention, and relaxation, especially for kids who crave salty foods, right? Which can be a signal that they're low in some of their mineral stores. Even things like iron and vitamin D, super, super important. They're definitely worth checking to make sure that they are not too low. Even mild deficiencies can affect mood, energy, and focus. So the key here is food first, supplement second. Whole foods are going to definitely provide more, and they're going to get absorbed better than any supplement will. Okay, so let's move into therapies and functional approaches. I have a little guest with me, so if you hear some noises in the background, that's little baby taking a little feed. There are also some therapies that can definitely work on regulation, helping the body to get calm and organized. Okay, so of course, what we do is myofunctional therapy, retraining proper tongue posture, nasal breathing, making sure that the muscles and the face are relaxed, balanced, and working as they're supposed to be and not overcompensating in one area or another. Craniosacral therapy is another option. This is a very, very gentle, super relaxing, I might say, type of body work that can help release tension patterns and improve sleep and regulation. You need somebody who is a craniosacral therapist who's been trained in that type of therapy. And sometimes chiropractors are, and sometimes PTs are. It really just depends on their training. You can also see an occupational therapist for sensory regulation issues and executive functioning skills. Chiropractors, osteopathic adjustments can be incredibly helpful when structural alignment and vagus nerve function is contributing to that poor regulation. And we actually do work with the vagus nerve through our safe and sound protocol that we use, which is an auditory music therapy that helps sort of retune their nervous system for safety and focus. So that is a part of our program that we do use with all of our parents and kids to help that vagus nerve to be nice and calm and relax and feel safe, which then in turn helps kids feel safe and enough to explore new foods. Are any of these miracle cures? No. But for the right child in the right combination, it could really fill the gaps that medicine can't even reach. Now, let's get into medicine. I mean, this is where parents definitely get the most conflicted for sure. And common ADHD medications include stimulants like Ritalin or at things like Adderall, and non-stimulants, like clonidine. These are really sort of heavy duty medications that we're talking about here. They work by increasing dopamine and norepinephrine, chemicals that help with attention and motivation. And for many kids, they have reported life-changing effects, right? But there is a big but here. It's not without other effects on the body. The most common side effects are things like loss of appetite, not great for our picky eaters, and weight loss, not good for our failure to thrive kids. Stomach aches and nausea, not good for our picky eaters. That's definitely setting them back. Trouble falling asleep, and in some cases, constipation or emotional blunting. Because stimulants speed up metabolism and suppress appetite, kids often eat less during the day, which can create nutritional deficits over time. And as a feeding therapist, I always encourage parents to make breakfast count before medication really kicks in and to focus on nutrient-dense evening meals when appetite returns. There is, though, research showing that long-term stimulant use can affect your gut microbiome. And I would say any any amount of time with medication can affect your gut microbiome. I don't think it has to be long-term. But we're definitely seeing shifts in beneficial bacteria and diversity, which makes sense because the gut and the brain are in constant conversation with one another through the vagus nerve. So if your child is on ADHD medication, we definitely want to support the gut with fiber-rich foods, probiotics, and hydration. And medication really is not failure. Okay. It's not giving up. It's a tool. And for some families, it really opens the door to other work that heals the root cause. So sometimes it's a temporary bridge. But the goal should never be just give them the medication and the problem will go away. It's to create enough calm and stability that we can uncover what the body and the brain really need to work in harmony with one another. So how can we support dopamine and norepinephrine naturally instead of using medications, right? So we can't necessarily supplement our way to balance, but we can nourish it. When we look at ADHD through the lens of the brain, not a behavior lens, it starts to make a lot of sense why so many kids are struggling to focus, maybe feel unmotivated, or have difficulty with following through. The two main chemicals involved in focus and motivation are, you guessed it, dopamine and norepinephrine. Dopamine is going to drive reward and motivation. It's the feel-good signal. So it's saying to your body, hey, this is interesting. Let's keep going. Norepinephrine, on the other hand, supports alertness and energy. It helps our brain tune in and filter out distractions. Sounds like something ADHD people have trouble with, right? Most ADHD medications increase these neurotransmitters really quickly, which can help focus, but at the cost of appetite, mood, or gut balance. So the good news is we can help the brain to make and regulate these chemicals naturally by supporting the systems that produce them in the first place. And here's how. Number one, we're going to feed the neurotransmitters. Dopamine and norepinephrine are made from amino acids, specifically two amino acids found in protein-rich foods. So the very first step is to make sure your child is getting enough protein, especially in the morning. So, there is a phrase, if you want your child to focus better by 10 a.m., feed their brain protein by 8 a.m. So sources of protein are going to be things like eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, chicken, turkey, fish, beans, nut butter, lentils. You could do smoothies with protein with added flax seeds, chia seeds, collagen. Even 10 to 15 grams of protein at breakfast can really help boost dopamine and norepinephrine naturally without a prescription. You can also include foods that help build the cofactors for neurotransmitter production. So things that, your body uses to create these neurotransmitters. Things like vitamin C, iron, zinc, and B vitamins. When those nutrients are low, the body literally just can't make neurotransmitters. So the medications are basically replacing what's missing. Okay. We can also use targeted supplement support. Okay. In our roadmap assessment, we look at the brain and personality patterns based on Dr. Amen's work. Not because every ADHD brain needs the same kind of support, but for example, low dopamine types crave stimulation, newness, rewards, right? So they benefit from supplements like B vitamins, L-tyrosine. Okay, low norepinephrine types may struggle more with alertness and energy. They might respond to things better like green tea, ginseng, low serotonin kids, they might do better with something like 5-HTP, magnesium, and omega-3s. So the point is we don't really want to guess. You want to know which part of the brain needs help and to feed it strategically. And that's exactly what we do inside of our program, where we use this model to personalize your plan, along with the gut testing, food sensitivity testing, our sensory profiling, and our oral motor skills to see what exactly is happening. And putting all these pieces together, it's really going to get this full picture of exactly why your child is having these struggles and how maybe ADHD and their feeding maybe aren't so distant as you might have thought. They might be very well connected to one another. You could also just do some lifestyle changes, like increasing movement. Like we said, increases that dopamine and norepinephrine naturally as well. Sunlight, morning exposure to sunlight can be really helpful with your circadian rhythm. Sleep, making sure we're getting them that deep sleep to replenish those neurotransmitter stores. Mouth breathing and slow and snoring are going to deplete them. And, novelty and connection. Dopamine loves new. So building small wins into their day, praise, progress charge, fun tasks, surprises, that can trigger motivation for sure. So if ADHD medication increases dopamine and norepinephrine, our job is to help the body do it naturally and biologically, right? That's the difference between temporary focus to long-term benefits. You can use medication as a bridge for sure. Or you can help rebuild the bridge from within using the right foods, nutrients, habits, and personalized support. Because when the brain gets what it needs, the behavior is what you're going to see that follows it. Okay. So, my last thing, when you understand how your child's brain works, everything is going to change. After everything we've talked about, breathing, sleep, diet, movement, supplements, and medication, I want to leave you with this. ADHD is not a broken brain. There's nothing wrong with the child that has ADHD. It is a different brain. Okay. It's a brain wired for novelty, creativity, quick problem solving. It's a brain that can hyperfocus when it's very passionate. They can notice patterns that other people miss and bring energy to every room that they walk into. So the brain that struggles in systems that are not designed for it, like classrooms, long to-do lists, environments that reward stillness over curiosity, those traits that can make childhood really challenging might be the ones that help them thrive as an adult. These are entrepreneurs, engineers, artists, creators, and leaders. So instead of asking, how do I fix my child? Let's asking, what does my child's brain need to function its best? That's why inside of our program, we take such a personalized approach. We don't just label kids and stop there. We look at why. Why do they have this behavior? Why do they have this fear of food? Why aren't they sleeping well? Why are they constipated? Why are they a little bit more behavioral in school? Why are they having trouble focusing? All of those questions are things that when we try to answer them, we're getting really good, deep data and information to help your body function better, right? So when we look at the why, we want to keep it all in balance. We use a lot of different frameworks to assess your child's skill levels in all these different areas, right? So we want to see which systems need the most support, the right support, what kind of supports would be best, and how to do that as naturally as possible. So if your child struggles with focus, motivation, regulation, and you've tried all the basics without real change, you might actually find some real answers when we start looking into their feeding, right? So you can learn more about your child's where they are in their feeding process at the pickyeaterstest.com. It's where you'll find the quiz that leads to our roadmap, our assessment. It helps you see where your child's challenges are, where their strengths are, and it's really rooted in things like brain chemistry, gut health, lab tests, sensory profiles, and oral motor, very deep dive assessments. When you understand how their brain and body work, everything changes because we're not fighting it anymore. We're working with the body. We're using its strengths to propel as much as we can, and we're targeting the weaknesses to bring them back into balance. Okay, so that's where we like to focus our time and energy. And it's such a good investment into your child's future, because if we can get their brains and bodies functioning optimally as a child and not having to, struggle through childhood sitting in, chairs that are just so uncomfortable for them, trying to sit all day when their body just wants to move. If we can bring them back into a balanced state where they can thrive, hopefully in any environment, and they don't have to wait until they're an adult to get it figured out or to find where they could be most comfortable. If we can get them more comfortable now in their own bodies, imagine what their futures can hold. So I hope that this episode was really helpful and eye-opening and enlightening and motivating, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.